Derek Carr had one of the most interesting careers in NFL history. From being number one in the MVP race in his junior season to retiring on a different team just 8 years later, he suffered from dysfunctional organizations, bad luck, and despite being on multiple talented teams, he only made it to one playoff game in 11 seasons. This is Derek Carr's NFL story. But we first need to explain how he even made it to the NFL. Carr committed to the same school his brother got picked number 1 overall from, Fresno State. And while there, he improved his numbers every single season, amassing in his Heisman-level 2013 season where he threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, most of which went to Devontae Adams, who will become important later. He even became the first Fresno State quarterback to win a conference title since 1993, which even his brother couldn't do. But he played in the Mountain West, so he only got 8th in Heisman voting, but it was still enough to catapult him into a round 1 talent at the 2014 NFL Draft. Although there were quite a few round 1 quarterbacks like Teddy Bridgewater and Money Manziel, there were plenty of quarterback-needy teams, such as the struggling Oakland Raiders, who desperately needed to draft a quarterback heading into the draft. So surely he would be a first-rounder.
The Oakland Raiders select Khalil Mack.
Oh, but I thought this was a Raiders video. Why didn't he get picked at number 5, and who even is Khalil Mack? Well, my child, he would become very, very important eventually, but for now, the Raiders passed on their quarterback, but luckily enough, he was still there 31 picks later in the second round, where he would finally be selected by the Oakland Raiders.
Derek Carr, quarterback, Fresno State.
Now, heading into the 2014 NFL season, the Raiders were going to play it safe and start veteran Matt Schaub to get Derek some experience from the bench. But I don't know if you noticed the problem here, but it was Matthew Schaub, and he was no competition for even a rookie Derek Carr, and by the end of the preseason, head coach Dennis Allen felt confident enough to start Carr heading into the regular season. So, now with the stage set for young Derek Carr to come into a terrible roster and coaching situation, this was looking like the all-too-common formula that so many teams and promising quarterbacks fall into when the team doesn't have the talent to support a developing player. But the season still had to be played, but oh my god. I mean, nobody could have seen how bad this team really was going to be. Let's just put this into perspective for you. By week 11, the Raiders hadn't even won a game. And combined with last season, they had impressively lost the 4th most games in a row by an NFL franchise all time. But it was kind of expected and also not Derek's fault, like pretty much at all, as the defense may have been one of the worst ever, but he also just had absolutely no talent around him, so he ended the year with 3,200 yards, 21 touchdowns, but 12 interceptions. So there were going to be some growing pains, but along with the piss-poor talent on his side of the ball, he showed flashes, like in the Raiders' first win of the season, where in a rain game on Thursday night against a division rival, he pulled off a comeback to win. But more importantly, he gave a sad, sad franchise and fan base hope. And along with hiring Jack Del Rio seconds after he shoved his fist up Oakland's in the last game of the season, this team seemed to be heading in the right direction. So with a new, young identity and many, many holes to fill, the Raiders actually didn't have a bad offseason at all. They made some great moves like grabbing Michael Crabtree, a first-team All-Pro center in Roddy Hudson, and of course Aldon Smith. But along with getting Carr a future number 1 receiver in Amari Cooper, this team, at least on the outside, really looked like they were starting to build something special. And 2015 was certainly special, but it was an improvement. Despite being so incredibly mediocre, the defense was bad and there were a few injury issues, but by the end of all of it, Derek had proven that he could not only be clutch, get the ball to his talented playmakers, and overall lead a team when need be. And this actually ended with him making a Pro Bowl in just his second season, and nearly breaking the Raiders' all-time single-season passing touchdowns mark with 32, which granted he would never reach again, but this was his sophomore season. Now, I know I did just say that this defense was dog poo, which wasn't like a total lie, but they did have this guy. And in his second season, he was one of the best defensive ends in the league, with 15 sacks, 23 tackles for loss, and he instantly became an all-pro. And I know that this is a Derek Carr video, but I just have to mention how important Khalil Mack became for this team, because he was essentially the Derek Carr of the defense. They got drafted in the same class, are both rising stars, and have completely turned around both sides of the ball, and without both of them, the Raiders just wouldn't be here. But at the same time, the defense still needs a lot of work, and oh boy did they work on it in free agency. By grabbing up multiple great defensive backs to fill the Charles Woodson-sized hole, and after adding some more defensive guys in the draft who would admittedly do f*** all except for Carl Joseph, I guess. The Raiders were probably just going to be incredibly mediocre for the 2016 NFL season again. But holy shit. I mean, the Raiders just made an incredible comeback on Drew motherfucking Brees. Went for 2 to win and got it. And, I mean, if this was a game to set the tone for the rest of the season, I don't know what is. And actually, that was exactly what happened. Well, first, they got pummeled by Matt Ryan, but Oakland then locked the f*** in and went on an unprecedented streak as through week 15, they won every single game besides those goddamn Chiefs. But no matter what it was, as long as the Walrus himself wasn't on the other sideline, the Raiders just won by 17 or 1 point. They just kept winning. And of course, the main contributors were these two. One was leading the race for DPOY, and by week 12, Derek Carr was number 1 in MVP voting. And this was not because other quarterbacks are bad. In fact, Carr had taken a massive leap, but after a thrilling Panthers game, DC's play significantly fell off as he broke his pinky. Yeah, it's not exactly easy to play well at quarterback with a broken hand, but he trudged on and still led his team to wins, and even if he wasn't going to get MVP, he still led his team to the playoffs, and there was finally a chance for the Raiders to taste success, and oh shit.
It's broke. It's broke. It's broke.
With the Raiders up 33-7 in an actually very, very important game with major playoff implications, the Jack Del Rio decided to keep his already injured MVP quarterback in, and he paid the price for it, with Derek Carr suffering a career-altering broken fibula. And along with Carr's leg, the team's dreams had completely shattered in one fell swoop. And so, Derek's year was over just like that, but there was still one more game to potentially clinch a round 1 bye. So every Raiders fan just sat and watched as Matt McGlynn, oh no, he got hurt too. Who's next on the rookie Connor Cook led this team, and yeah, it all fell apart as Oakland got dismantled in Denver, and this was it. The Raiders didn't even stand a chance against the 9-7 Houston Texans with Brock Osweiler in the wild card. And so, the Raiders' best season since 2002 and record-wise since, I think, the 90s was over just like that. But you can't just sit on the disappointment from the end of the season, as the Raiders look like competitors, and now with this much young talent, this was just an unlucky start to many years of dominance for DC. But this front office and Mr. Del Rio had other plans, as they fired their very successful offensive coordinator for fun, I guess, and brought in 2 aging NFC West players in Navarro Bowman and the previously retired Marshawn Lynch, who were clearly the answer in helping this team get over the hump. So, after signing DC to a massive extension, which we all know was a great decision, as well as drafting 9 players who combined did absolutely nothing in this league, the Raiders looked like they were just hoping to run it back with a team that consistently found themselves in close games last year, and couldn't even beat fucking Brock Osweiler in the playoffs. So, obviously the Raiders were destined for success in 2017. And after week 2, it actually looks like that would be true, as they won back-to-back games to get the season started off right. But trust me, this was the end of any resemblance of an NFL team in Oakland this year, as the Raiders then lost 4 straight, and with their season pretty much on the line against the 5-1 Chiefs, Derek Carr completed about 56 game-winning touchdowns until the 57th didn't have a penalty on it, and the Raiders broke their streak. And after that win, it almost felt like they had refound their stride, as they then won 3 of 5, putting their own destiny back in their own hands. So after winning in New Jersey to reach 6-6, all they needed to do was win at least 3 or 4 of their final games to at least get a shot at the playoffs. And admittedly, they did play multiple potential playoff teams and the Super Bowl champions, so it would be a rough road ahead, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. Yeah, it was bad, and the Raiders completely fell apart as they lost every single one of those games, and it was not pretty. I mean, okay, they nearly beat the Cowboys, but by a literal index card, Dallas held on. And from there, Oakland ended 6-10. It was a complete turnaround in the wrong direction, and the main cause outside of injuries was regression, as Derek, despite still making his 3rd Pro Bowl, threw for 500 less yards, 7 more interceptions, and 6 less touchdowns, and had a significantly worse passer rating. But it wasn't only him, as both of his top receivers, Cooper and Crabtree, regressed as well. So now going into the 2018 offseason, the Oakland Raiders had many questions and some questionable answers, as they started out by wiping clean of their entire coaching staff, which was somewhat fair, but to replace Mr. Del Rio, of course, they did what any other team would have done, and they gave John Gruden $100 million. John Gruden, $100 million. And I don't know if you need spoilers, but today, in 2025, he should have 3 years left, and he hasn't been on the Raiders since 2021, so clearly it worked out, right? Well, to start his reign of terror, only 2 years after their most successful season in years, it was clear that they needed to tank. So, they did all in free agency and made 3 specific, very questionable trades. Number 1, in mid-season, you ship off Amari Cooper for a first-round pick, which in 2025 would seem f***ing blasphemous, but this is 2018 John Gruden, so he wasn't done wheeling and dealing, as he also traded a third-round pick for Martavis Bryant, who they then cut seconds later. But to finish off this disaster of a cake with a little icing on top, the Raiders traded their franchise cornerstone and best defensive player over the last half-decade, and probably one of their best since the early 2000s, for 2 first-round picks. So, if it wasn't obvious enough, the Raiders were tanking. And that is exactly what happened. The Raiders only won 4 games the entire season, as their defense fell off a cliff without Khalil Mack. But this is a Derek Carr video, so let's do a little post-2018 checkup on the guy, and yeah, it wasn't great. As despite finally breaking 4,000 yards, he only had 19 touchdowns and 10 total interceptions. And with his best receivers being an old-ass Jordy Nelson in his final season, Jalen Richard, who is a f***ing running back, and Jared Cook, who actually this entire time has been the one constant on the Raiders offense, it was just a disaster class of a season, or as John Gruden would say, the perfect season, as landed the number 4 overall pick in the 2019 NFL Draft. But first, it's time to really start turning this team around in free agency. So it started out on an interesting note, as they fired the previous GM for an NFL Network analyst, but it was Gruden's team anyway, so it shouldn't really matter, probably. So now let's look at his 2019 free agency class, and it actually was not terrible. Of course, Terrell Williams was supposed to be the headliner, and he just ended up being fine, but they made sure to upgrade an already mediocre offensive line group with Jordan Devey and future Pro Bowler Trent Brown, who was given the largest contract for an O-lineman ever. But, of course, the biggest move of this free agency was the blockbuster trade for the best wide receiver in the NFL, potential future Hall of Famer, Antonio Brown. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not even gonna dwell on the fact that this happened, because it was all over before the goddamn season even started. It was a clown parade of the highest former Steelers wide receiver and Raiders magic level possible, and he was cut before he even had a chance to succeed. So yeah, that was a lot. But there was a draft that happened a few months prior that the Raiders actually fucking smashed out of the ballpark. And no, it was not reaching by 20 picks to pick Cleveland Farrell over Josh Hines Allen, Quinton Williams, Ed Oliver, and more. No, it was not their 3rd first-round pick of Jonathan Abram. It was their 2nd first-round pick of Josh Jacobs, who eventually became the true number 1 running back that the Raiders have been hoping for since Latavius Murray. But one player doesn't make a great draft class, so they went out and got future Pro Bowler in Hunter Renfrow and the second coming of Khalil Mack in Max Crosby. And spoiler, he actually stays this time. So, now with a young core that could begin to mold into another playoff team, the 2019 season started, and it was actually successful. Carr seemed to find his stride again despite having Madden-generated 60 overall wide receivers, as he had 2,400 yards, 15 touchdowns, and only 4 picks through Week 11, as he had the Raiders sitting at 6-4 in prime position to make a playoff push. And it only got better, as in Week 11, Max Crosby had put 4 sacks on the board, and with Josh Jacobs having a 1,000-yard season, the Raiders had hope again. But there was another half of the season, and they raided it, and they raided it bad, as they went 1-5 from then on out, getting embarrassed each week, not even including their final game ever in Oakland, where they got emotionally torn to shreds by Minshew Mania. And it was especially bad for Carr, as he got booed off the field, even though he was still improving from last year, with 4,000 yards again, as well as reducing and increasing his picks and touchdowns. But in the words of the broken man himself, it is what it is, and now off to Vegas, and with young talent all around him, his future looked bright. But don't worry, Derek. The old John Gruden will make sure that that will never happen, as the only notable player that he signed was Nelson Aguilar, who I completely forgot ever played for Vegas, probably because he was gone the next season, but Mr. Gruden was not done, as he then went into the 2020 NFL Draft and drafted a bust at every single possible place he could. Worst of all, in the first round, he not only got the fastest Henry Ruggs, who was a great talent but had issues, and then in the same round, he took Damon Arnett. So, yeah. Now with the 2020 season set to start with no fans to experience the brand new stadium in Las Vegas, the Raiders did the exact same thing they did in 2019. Because through week 11, they were making upsets and beating teams they shouldn't, and were sitting at a proud 6-4. And most importantly, they had played the Super Bowl champion Chiefs incredibly well, as they barely lost to them in week 11, and they even beat them earlier in the season. So, once again, they had their own destiny in their own hands. But this is the John Gruden Raiders, so the second there was hope, he just snatched it right back, and they proceeded to completely fall apart and ended the year 8-8 and missed the playoffs once again. But it was a somewhat fake 8-8, as in week 13, after getting their asses handed to them by a terrible Falcons team, they turned around and got incredibly lucky because they were playing the Jets, and actually won a game before predictably losing 3 straight to end any potential playoff hopes. But again, Derek Carr just kept improving, as a lot of the time he put them in positions to win, but the defense put them in positions to lose. So Carr quietly put together one of, if not his most successful seasons of his career, with 27 touchdowns, only 9 picks, and the second most yards he would ever throw for, as well as the highest QBR and pass rating of his entire career to this day. So, heading into the offseason, as John Gruden was damn near on the hot seat, he decided to actually have an alright free agency by improving the defense as much as he could, but then in the draft, the Raiders continued to just bust all over the first round, drafting Alex Leatherwood, who wasn't even supposed to be in the first round of the damn draft, but John actually kind of made up for it by drafting the first 3 impactful players in Vegas Raiders history in Trevon Morg, Divine Diablo, and Nate Hobbs, who all met needs on defense. So, now, with the Raiders continuing to slowly improve through questionable transactions, it was time for the 2021 NFL season, and boy, was it a good one. At least at the start it was, as Carr and the Raiders started 3-0, and you'll never believe this one, Derek Carr was back in the MVP race, baby! And with this much momentum, it seemed like a guarantee that the Raiders would maybe even compete this year, and oh, there goes John. Okay, so a little explaining is necessary, because this whole time, on the other side of the country, this man was getting investigated for some pretty terrible stuff, but somehow, during the NFL's investigations, they found some pretty wild emails from a couple of decades ago from the Gruden himself, and decided to shove the spotlight away from the owner and onto the much more financially expendable coach, and Gruden was basically forced to resign right after losing to Khalil Mack. So, yeah, that was a lot. But with the problem most likely gone, it was time for Derek Carr and the new interim head coach, Rich Bisaccia, to prove that it was always Gruden's fault. And it actually started great, with the Raiders picking up easy dubs against the Broncos and Eagles heading into the bye week. But you always gotta remember one thing, that no matter how Gruden this team is, they will always be the Raiders. So they went on a streak and a half, including not only the tragic Henry Ruggs situation, but also their other 2020 first-round pick, Damon Arnett, did some silly stuff, and by week 14, they had lost 5 of 6, and now we're sitting at 6-7, with the playoffs pretty much a distant hope. But after all of that, all of the chaos of this season, and all of the things that the Raiders have been in over the last 2 years, something really magical started to happen, as after the death of Raiders legend John Madden, and they started to win multiple games, and by week 18, this team was thrust into playoff contention because it was winning in against the division rival Chargers. But after choking the game into overtime, in a strange scenario of possibly both teams making the playoffs if they tied, Brandon Staley did some Brandon Staley things, and even though Derek Carr himself felt pity for the Chargers and would let them in as well, Brandon decided to throw the game away and let the Raiders kick a playoff-clinching field goal. So, after that football game, it was set. Derek Carr was now going to play in a playoff game for the first time in his career. But, unfortunately, they played the far, far superior and future AFC champs in the Cincinnati Bengals. So, it was really never a competition. And Derek was fine, I guess. In his only playoff game in his career, he couldn't exactly put his team in a winning situation, but again, they played the Bengals, so they got let off with a pass for now, as even though this had pretty much been expected since 2016, this season was still a pleasant surprise, and once again, it gave Raiders fans hope, a thing that I promise you will not last long. In fact, not even a month, as the Raiders fired their successful interim head coach, as well as every staff member on the team, to make way for the coach that would surely lead them to the success they've been hoping for, Josh McDaniels. Oh, God. So, I guess now it's time for the Josh era. And it started out hot, as along with a new GM, the Raiders beefed up the defense and traded for a superstar wide receiver, which is a plan that has never failed, as Derek Carr was finally reunited with the same Devontae Adams from Fresno State all those years ago. And now after another piss-poor draft where the Raiders didn't even begin until the 90th pick, Vegas was ready to restart and show everybody how good Derek Carr really can be. But let me just remind you, I don't know if you forgot from the last 30 seconds, but this team, which had Derek Carr, a top 5 wide receiver and running back, was coached by Josh McDaniels, so it was exactly how you would imagine it would go. As the Raiders finished 6-11, and despite Derek Carr making a Pro Bowl somehow, he really only got worse. And as the now well over 30-year-old was struggling to keep up with a brand new style of coaching, his passing yards fell off a cliff for the first time in his career, and he even got benched by the end of the season. So now this is the point in which we pivot to a brand new place, as the Raiders, still showing little respect to their quarterback, who had completely revitalized them, was cut, and Derek Carr was a free agent for the first time in his career. And now, in a brand new city, after signing with the Saints, there was definitely potential for a revenge tour, as the Saints still had some talent left from the late Drew Brees years, and were in a terrible division, so really, anything could happen. And now going into 2023, Carr really wasn't terrible. He actually improved with 3,800 yards, 25 touchdowns, and only 8 picks. But after sustaining his 5th recorded injury on the season in Week 13, the Saints stared down a disappointing 5-7 record. But let me tell you what, Derek Carr has been beaten down his entire career, from little faith in him to devastating injuries, so he was not going to let this be the end of him. And so, with the season on the line, Derek Carr locked the in.
Carr looking deep, and it is juggled and caught! Touchdown! Carr has all day taken a deep shot. Shaheed is down there. Shaheed, he's got it!
The Saints then won their next 4 of 5 in dominating fashion, with Carr going buck wild with 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns, and only 2 picks to finish the season 9-8. But even though they tied with the Buccaneers and even beat them in the second to last game, it just wasn't enough, and they were eliminated from the playoffs by 1 game. And this was really an improvement. I mean, if Foster Moreau caught this game-winning touchdown against the Jags, the Saints would have been a playoff team. I do feel like people forget this now because the Saints are so terrible, but unfortunately, probably their biggest curse was the fact that they won 9 games. As, despite this team being very, very mid, they just gave Dennis Allen a whole nother year to cause terror, and after a nothing offseason, they were good, out of nowhere, like really good. I mean, of course, now it's only 2-0, but holy Derek Carr was in the MVP race again, as the Saints put up 91 points in the first 2 weeks of 2024. And yes, it was the Cowboys and Panthers, but still, blowouts matter when you're beating bad teams. And I hate to use this word, but there was now hope for another playoff appearance for Derek Carr and for this aging Saints team, and oh no. The Saints then lost 7 straight games, and I mean, this was really it for Carr, as despite starting 2-0 and being in the MVP race, in the same year he retained multiple injuries that kept him out for most of the season. But really, would he have made a difference? Probably not, and the Saints were thrust into full tanking form heading into the offseason after finishing 5-12. And here we are in 2025, as Derek Carr, after continuing to deal with some nagging injuries, has retired from the NFL after 11 polarizing seasons. He was never consistently the best, and maybe, just maybe, if he wasn't drafted to the Raiders, he would still be playing at an MVP form today. But nobody will ever know. So, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time. See ya.